"Give me your phone." Nobody believed the curvy librarian had actually said it. The tall man didn't respond. Neither did the security team behind him. Margot Ellis stepped forward, took the phone from his hand, ended the call, and returned it without raising her voice. "No phone conversations inside the library," she said, pointing to the small sign by the entrance. Every reader stopped breathing, because the man she had just interrupted was Leonardo Morelli. Exceptionally handsome, owner of a multi-billion-dollar global empire, and the secret leader of one of the world's most feared mafia organizations. Everyone expected anger. Instead, Leonardo slipped the phone into his pocket, lowered his head slightly, and said, "My mistake." For the first time in anyone's memory, the city's most feared man had apologized over a library rule. By the next morning, the entire town had seen the video. Someone had captured the astonishing exchange on a phone before the conversation ended. Within hours, clips spread across every social media platform under countless captions. "Fearless librarian silences billionaire." Who tells Leonardo Morelli to be quiet? The only woman who took his phone away. Millions of people watched the 15-second clip again and again, expecting a violent reaction that never came. Instead, they watched the city's most intimidating businessman apologize with quiet dignity. The internet became obsessed. Some claimed the woman must secretly know Leonardo. Others insisted she was a retired police officer. A few even invented elaborate stories that she belonged to a powerful family capable of standing against him. Every theory was wrong. Margot Ellis didn't even know a video had gone viral. At 36, she rarely checked social media. Most mornings began exactly the same way. She unlocked the front door of Ellis Neighborhood Library before sunrise, switched on the reading lamps one by one, watered the potted plants near the windows, and returned books to their proper shelves before the first visitors arrived. The library wasn't fashionable. It wasn't trendy. It certainly wasn't profitable. But it was loved. Children came after school to finish homework. Retired neighbors spent afternoons reading newspapers together. Young parents borrowed bedtime stories every Friday. Everyone knew. Everyone. That was exactly how Margot liked it. Late that afternoon, a teenage volunteer rushed through the entrance, nearly forgetting to close the door behind him. "Miss Ellis," he exclaimed, "you're everywhere online." Margot looked up from a stack of returned mystery novels. "I'm where?" "The internet." He held out his phone. She watched the short clip with growing confusion. "Oh," she said after a moment. "Someone recorded yesterday." He stared at her. "That's all you have to say?" She shrugged. "I only reminded someone about the rules." "Do you even know who he is?" She adjusted a crooked label on a bookshelf before answering. "No." The teenager blinked. "That's Leonardo Morelli. Should I recognize the name?" "You've seriously never heard of him?" Margot smiled apologetically. "I spend most of my day with books. They don't usually mention billionaires." The teenager laughed in disbelief. Within days, curious strangers began visiting the library. Some borrowed books. Most simply wanted to see the woman who had embarrassed Leonardo Morelli without realizing it. Margot treated every visitor exactly the same. If someone whispered too loudly, she reminded them to lower their voice. If a child returned a book late, she explained the borrowing policy with patient kindness. If someone forgot to silence a phone, she pointed toward the same wooden sign. The excitement slowly settled. By the following Friday afternoon, the library felt normal again, until the front door opened. Conversation stopped almost instantly. Leonardo Morelli walked inside alone. No phone, no security guards, no dramatic entrance. He carried only a simple library card application in one hand. He waited quietly until Margot looked up from her desk. She smiled politely, as though greeting any other new visitor. "Welcome back," she said. Are you here to borrow a book this time? For the first time in many years, Leonardo realized he genuinely hoped the answer would be yes. Leonardo returned the next Friday, and the Friday after that. Soon, the regular visitors stopped asking whether he would come. Instead, they quietly wondered what library rule he would accidentally break next. The first incident happened less than 5 minutes after he checked out his first book. Margot noticed him sliding a folded page corner to mark where he had stopped reading. She appeared beside his chair so silently that he almost jumped. "We don't fold pages." Leonardo looked down at the tiny crease. "I wasn't aware." She reached into a nearby basket, took out a simple blue bookmark decorated with painted wildflowers, and handed it to him. "Books remember stories for us," she said. "We don't need to hurt them to remember the page." He accepted the bookmark with surprising seriousness. "I'll remember." Across the room, 2 elderly women exchanged amused smiles. One whispered, "She just scolded Leonardo Morelli like he was 12. The other nodded, and he listened. The following week, he committed another offense. After finishing a chapter, Leonardo absent-mindedly placed the book upside down on the table. Margot noticed immediately. She gently turned it upright. "Books aren't chairs," she said. He blinked. "I'm sorry?" "They don't enjoy balancing on their heads." For a moment, Leonardo simply stared at her. Then a quiet laugh escaped before he could stop it. "You believe books have feelings. I believe people take better care of things when they imagine they do." He looked at the novel again before carefully setting it upright. Fair enough. By the 3rd week, everyone in the library had begun treating these tiny exchanges like a favorite television series. Children pretended to read while secretly watching Leonardo. Retirees delayed going home just to see whether he would unknowingly break another rule. Even Margot seemed unaware that her ordinary corrections had become the week's most anticipated entertainment. One rainy afternoon, Leonardo arrived carrying a dripping umbrella. Without thinking, he leaned it against a bookshelf. Margot appeared almost instantly. "Umbrella stand." She pointed toward the entrance. He glanced at the puddle forming beneath it. "My mistake." Back to the entrance he went. Several readers struggled to hide their laughter. A little boy whispered to his grandmother, "He's getting better." The old woman smiled. "He has an excellent teacher." Leonardo heard every word. Oddly enough, he didn't mind. Outside the library, people obeyed him because they feared him. Inside, someone corrected him because she believed everyone deserved the same standards. It was strangely comforting. One afternoon, Margot scanned the borrowing records while shelving returned books. "You've borrowed 6 history books this month," she observed. Leonardo nodded. "Yes." She tilted her head. "You've renewed every one of them." "I have. And you've only finished 1. He hesitated. "Perhaps I'm reading carefully." She folded her arms. "Or perhaps you're borrowing faster than you can read." For the first time in years, Leonardo looked genuinely embarrassed. "I may have been optimistic." Margot smiled. "Next time, borrow 2. "Only 2? Books aren't going anywhere." He laughed softly. "I suppose they aren't." As the weeks passed, the library staff noticed something else. Leonardo no longer entered looking over his shoulder. He left his phone in silent mode before opening the front door. He greeted the volunteers by name. Sometimes he even helped children reach books from the highest shelves without anyone asking. No cameras followed him inside anymore. No meetings interrupted his visits. For exactly 2 hours every Friday, he became nothing more than another library patron. Margot never treated him differently. She still reminded him to return books on time. She still corrected him whenever he forgot the smallest rule. And somehow, those ordinary moments became the highlight of his entire week. Without realizing it, the most feared man in the city had begun organizing his life around Friday afternoons in a little neighborhood library. Leonardo never mentioned the insomnia, not to his board of directors, not to his physicians, not even to the men who had protected him for nearly 20 years. They all knew he barely slept. No one knew why. Most nights followed the same pattern. He would leave the office well after midnight, return to his penthouse overlooking the city, loosen his tie, and stare through floor-to-ceiling windows while the lights below slowly disappeared. When sleep refused to come, he answered emails, reviewed financial reports, approved international investments. By dawn, he felt as exhausted as the night before. It had become so normal that he no longer expected anything different. Then, without realizing when it had begun, Fridays changed everything. After leaving Margot's library, he started reading the books he borrowed before bed. Not because history fascinated him. In truth, many chapters were painfully dull. But something about opening a library book carried home from that quiet building slowed his restless mind. The faint scent of old paper, the handwritten due date card tucked inside the cover, even the small blue bookmark Margot had given him weeks earlier. Together, they reminded him of a place where nobody demanded anything from him. One Friday night, he finished 2 chapters, closed the book, and fell asleep in the armchair before turning off the lamp. When he woke the next morning, sunlight was pouring through the windows. He looked at the clock twice, then a third time. 8 uninterrupted hours. He couldn't remember the last time that had happened. The following week, it happened again. Not every night, but often enough to feel impossible. His personal physician reviewed another routine examination and frowned. "Your blood pressure has improved." Leonardo simply nodded. "You also look rested." "I've been reading." The doctor blinked. "Reading?" "Before bed. I prescribed medication." "You did. And instead you're reading books?" Leonardo closed the medical file with a faint smile. They seemed to be helping. Even the men closest to him noticed the difference. One Monday morning, a senior captain watched Leonardo finish an entire strategy meeting without rubbing his temples once. Another quietly remarked, "Boss hasn't looked this relaxed in years." A third answered, "Whatever changed? I hope it never stops." No one dared ask the reason. They assumed it was a new treatment, or perhaps a business victory. The truth was almost laughably simple. A neighborhood library. Meanwhile, Margot remained completely unaware. To her, Leonardo was merely one of the few patrons who actually returned books on time. Well, almost on time. One Friday afternoon, she scanned a novel and frowned. This was due yesterday. Leonardo looked genuinely surprised. "I thought today was Thursday." "It hasn't been Thursday all day. I've been traveling." She crossed her arms with playful seriousness. "The library recognizes calendars, not excuses. So I'm guilty. I'm afraid so." She reached beneath the counter and produced a tiny printed slip. "Late fee." Leonardo glanced at the amount. "Less than the price of a cup of coffee. I'll pay immediately. You'll also promise not to overwork yourself so much that you forget what day it is." He looked at her for a long moment. "I'll try." She smiled. Good. Neither of them noticed several readers smiling behind nearby bookshelves. It was becoming impossible to ignore the change in him. The man who had first entered, carrying the weight of an empire, now lingered after choosing a book. Sometimes he wandered slowly through the history section with no intention of borrowing anything else. Sometimes he sat near the window for another 15 minutes, simply enjoying the silence. He never asked for special treatment, never requested privacy, never reminded anyone who he was. For 2 peaceful hours each week. He wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't a mafia boss. He wasn't the man everyone feared disappointing. He was simply Leonardo. A quiet reader, in the corner of a neighborhood library. And although Margot never realized it, she had become the only person in years who gave him something no amount of money or power had ever been able to buy: peace. Every Tuesday at precisely 3 o'clock, Professor Oliver Grant walked through the library doors, carrying a canvas satchel that looked almost as old as the history books he loved. Unlike most visitors, Oliver never came in silence. "Afternoon, Margot," he called cheerfully. "You're 3 minutes late," she replied without looking up from the circulation desk. "I stopped to rescue an abandoned history book. You bought another one. It looked lonely." Margot laughed. "Your house is becoming a museum." It already is. Their easy banter filled the library with quiet warmth. The regular patrons barely noticed anymore. It had been their routine for years. Oliver taught history at the local university, and every week he and Margot debated famous rulers, forgotten inventors, and strange historical facts, while shelving returned books. Sometimes they disagreed. More often, they laughed. The conversations were never loud enough to disturb readers, yet somehow they made the library feel even more welcoming. The following Friday, Leonardo arrived as usual. He returned 3 books, borrowed 2 more. Then he heard laughter. Not the polite smile Margot offered every customer. Real laughter. The kind that made her shoulders relax and her eyes brighten. He glanced toward the history section. Oliver was standing beside a display table, enthusiastically describing an ancient king who had accidentally declared war on the wrong country. Margot covered her mouth, trying unsuccessfully to stop laughing. Leonardo looked down at the history book in his own hands. For reasons he couldn't explain, he suddenly disliked history. The feeling surprised him. He had negotiated billion-dollar mergers without emotion, faced armed rivals without blinking. Yet watching another man make Margot laugh unsettled him far more than any boardroom confrontation. The next Friday, he arrived 10 minutes earlier than usual. Oliver was already there. Naturally, Leonardo wandered toward the history shelves. Margot noticed. "I didn't realize you enjoyed history this much." "I'm developing an interest," she smiled. "Wonderful." Then she pulled a thick volume from the shelf and handed it to him. "If you're serious, start with this." Leonardo glanced at the title. Economic Systems of Medieval Europe. Nearly 900 pages. His expression remained perfectly calm. Inside, he questioned every life decision that had brought him to this moment. "I'll give it my best. You asked for history. I did." Oliver walked over, recognizing Leonardo from the viral video months earlier. "Excellent choice," the professor said enthusiastically. "Chapter 7 completely changes the way people understand trade routes." Leonardo opened the book at random. "I'll keep that in mind." Oliver continued speaking with genuine excitement. Margot listened with interest. Leonardo listened with increasing confusion. 5 minutes later, Oliver asked, "What do you think?" Leonardo paused. "The maps are very detailed." Oliver blinked. "The maps?" "Yes, they're excellent." Margot stared at him for a second before laughing again. "You haven't read a single page, have you?" Leonardo admitted defeat with a small smile. "Not yet. I thought so." She gently took the enormous book from his hands and replaced it on the shelf. "This one would only frighten beginners. So there is hope for me?" "There might be." She selected a much thinner history book and handed it to him instead. "Start here." Leonardo accepted it with obvious relief. Oliver chuckled. A wise recommendation. Over the following weeks, the 3 of them often found themselves discussing books together. Oliver loved facts. Margot loved stories. Leonardo mostly listened. Whenever he attempted to contribute, Margot found an amusing way to correct him. Oddly enough, he enjoyed being corrected, because every playful disagreement ended with another one of her effortless smiles. and somewhere between history books he barely understood and conversations he secretly looked forward to. Leonardo realized he was no longer jealous of Oliver's knowledge. He was jealous of something much simpler: the years of ordinary friendship that Margot had freely given another man, long before Leonardo had ever walked into her library. The rumors began with a single photograph. Someone captured Leonardo leaving the library, carrying 3 borrowed books, while Margot locked the front door behind him. Neither of them noticed the camera across the street. By evening, the image was everywhere. Most people found it charming. Some called it unexpected. One person saw it as an opportunity. Serena Blake, elegant, wealthy, a familiar face on magazine covers and charity galas. For years, society pages had assumed she would eventually become Leonardo Morelli's wife. She never confirmed the rumors. She never denied them. Allowing people to speculate had always worked in her favor. Now, those same headlines had disappeared. Instead, everyone wanted to know why Leonardo spent every Friday inside a tiny neighborhood library. Serena decided to find out herself. She arrived the following afternoon, dressed as though she were attending a fashion show instead of visiting a community library. Designer heels echoed across the wooden floor. Several readers glanced up before returning to their books. Margot smiled politely. "Welcome." Serena looked around with poorly hidden disappointment. "So, this is the place." Margot nodded. "Can I help you find something?" "I'm looking for the woman who's been entertaining billionaires." The room grew quiet. Margot frowned. "I'm sorry?" Serena folded her sunglasses and placed them on the counter. "Let's not pretend." Her voice was calm enough to avoid shouting, yet loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "A powerful man doesn't visit the same little library every week without a reason." Margot answered with the same gentle tone she used for every difficult patron. "He comes here to borrow books." Serena smiled. "Do you really expect anyone to believe that?" A few visitors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Oliver, reading nearby, slowly closed his book. Serena continued. "You've built quite a clever image. The modest librarian, the ordinary woman, the one who's different from everyone else." She leaned slightly closer. "I suppose wealthy men find that irresistible." The accusation spread through the library like a cold draft. Margot stood quietly for several seconds. Then she reached toward the counter. "Not for an argument, for a laminated card." She placed it in front of Serena. "Our membership rules." Serena looked confused. "If you'd like to become a member, I'll be happy to explain how borrowing works." A teenager at the reading table struggled not to laugh. Serena's smile disappeared. "I'm insulting you." "I know. And you're offering me a library card. I offer one to everyone." Without another word, Serena turned and walked out. Unfortunately, someone had recorded the entire exchange. This time, the internet wasn't amused. Clips spread with cruel captions. "Librarian pretends to be innocent." Did she manipulate Leonardo Morelli? The library that catches billionaires. For the first time since opening the library years earlier, Margot stopped reading the comments. The words hurt more than she expected. She had spent her entire adult life protecting a place where everyone felt welcome. Now strangers who had never stepped inside accused her of using it for attention. 3 days later, Oliver found her packing books into storage boxes. "What are you doing?" She forced a small smile. "Taking a break." "For how long?" "I don't know. If people stop coming because of me, maybe the library deserves better." Oliver shook his head. "The library deserves you." Margot looked away. Meanwhile, Leonardo said nothing publicly. No interviews, no legal threats, no intimidating statements. His staff found that unusual. Instead, he made one quiet phone call. Over the next 2 weeks, delivery trucks began arriving at the library every morning. Children's classics, rare history collections, new novels, large print editions for elderly readers, reference books schools could never afford. Every shipment carried the same note: anonymous donation. Margot accepted them with gratitude, believing a generous reader had decided to help. Then a reporter investigating the deliveries discovered the truth. The donor was Leonardo Morelli. Not one book had been purchased for Margot. Every single donation had been addressed to the library itself. He hadn't bought her affection. He had protected the place that had given him peace. When the story reached the public, the conversation changed overnight. People no longer talked about a billionaire chasing a librarian. They talked about a man who quietly saved a neighborhood library without asking for recognition. And for the first time, Margot began wondering whether Leonardo's weekly visits had never been about her at all. Perhaps they had always been about the little library she loved. The anonymous donations transformed the library. Children gathered around shelves that had once stood half empty. Retirees discovered large print editions they had been requesting for years. Teachers began bringing entire classes for reading afternoons. Margot watched the library come alive in ways she had only dreamed about. Still, one question refused to leave her mind. Why? Why would Leonardo Morelli spend so much money on a place that offered him nothing in return? The answer arrived unexpectedly. One Friday afternoon, rain tapped gently against the library windows, while only a handful of readers occupied the building. Leonardo sat in his usual chair, beside the history shelves, a book resting open in his lap. Margot noticed something unusual. He wasn't reading. He had fallen asleep. Not the restless kind of sleep that disappears at the slightest sound. A deep, peaceful sleep. The book had slipped slightly in his hands. His breathing was slow and steady. She quietly walked over and placed another bookmark between the pages before closing the cover so it wouldn't fall. Then she draped a light wool blanket, normally reserved for children during winter reading hours, across the back of his chair. She returned to her desk without saying a word. Nearly 40 minutes later, Leonardo opened his eyes. For a brief moment, he looked confused, then embarrassed. "I'm sorry," he said softly, standing almost immediately. "I didn't mean to fall asleep." Margot smiled. "You weren't bothering anyone. I've never fallen asleep in public. There's a first time for everything." He looked toward the rain-covered windows. "I suppose there is." Later that afternoon, while Leonardo browsed another shelf, Oliver approached the circulation desk. "He looks different." Margot nodded. "He seems tired." Oliver lowered his voice. "I know someone who works for Morelli Global." Margot glanced up. "They say Leonardo hasn't slept properly for years." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "Chronic insomnia." Oliver shrugged. "Apparently everyone around him knows about it, but nobody knows how to help." Margot instinctively looked across the room. Leonardo was standing exactly where he always stood, running one finger slowly across the book spines, moving with the quiet patience of someone who had nowhere else he wanted to be. For the first time, she remembered every small detail: how he always arrived on Friday afternoons, how he never answered phone calls inside the library, how he often lingered after finishing a chapter instead of leaving immediately, how peaceful he looked today while sleeping in that worn reading chair. A realization settled gently into her heart. He hadn't been returning because the books were extraordinary. He hadn't been returning because the building was famous. He hadn't even been returning because of her. He kept coming back because this little library gave him something the rest of the world never could: silence, safety, ordinary life. That evening, as Leonardo prepared to leave, Margot stopped him near the checkout desk. "I've been wondering something." He looked at her with quiet curiosity. "Ask." She hesitated, then smiled. You don't actually enjoy history very much, do you? A rare laugh escaped him. I was hoping you hadn't noticed. I noticed after the second book. So why didn't you say anything? You seemed determined. He rubbed the back of his neck with an expression that was unexpectedly shy. I kept borrowing them because Professor Grant was always talking about history. You were trying to join the conversations. I was trying not to feel left out. Margot looked at him for a long moment. Then she walked toward another shelf and returned carrying a thin novel. No history this week. He accepted the book. What is it? My favorite story. Is it famous? She smiled. Not particularly. Then why this one? Because whenever life feels too loud. This book reminds me to slow down. Leonardo lowered his eyes to the worn cover. For the first time in years, someone wasn't trying to impress him, wasn't asking him for a favor, wasn't afraid of him. She was simply recommending a book she genuinely loved. He looked back at her. I think, he paused, choosing his words carefully. I never came here for the books. Margot's heart skipped. I know. You do. She nodded gently. You came here because, for a little while, you get to be just another person. Neither of them spoke after that. They didn't need to. Sometimes the truest understanding arrived without another word. And for the first time since they had met, Margot no longer saw the billionaire or the mafia boss. She saw a lonely man who had searched the entire world for peace, only to find it inside a quiet neighborhood library. 6 months later, Ellis Neighborhood Library had become one of the most beloved places in the region. Families drove in from neighboring towns every weekend. Teachers organized reading trips months in advance. Writers donated signed copies of their newest novels. The shelves that had once struggled to stay full were now overflowing with stories. Reporters returned again and again, hoping to capture another headline. This time, they all asked the same question. When will the library accept corporate sponsorship? The offers were generous. Renovations, advertising partnerships, even proposals to rename the building after wealthy donors. Margot thanked every organization politely, then declined every single one. The library already belongs to the community, she explained. I'd like to keep it that way. Many people thought Leonardo would convince her otherwise. Instead, he simply smiled when he heard her answer. Later that afternoon, one of his advisors quietly asked, wouldn't expanding the library be a good investment? Leonardo glanced toward the reading room, where children sat cross-legged listening to Margot read aloud. It isn't my decision. You could make it happen. I could. He watched Margot helping a little girl choose her very first chapter book. But she built this place by protecting it. I won't be the one who changes it. His advisor nodded, finally understanding. Power was not always about getting what you wanted. Sometimes, it was about respecting someone else's choice. Every Friday, Leonardo still arrived, carrying an empty canvas book bag. He returned the previous week's novels, borrowed another, spent 2 quiet hours reading in his favorite chair beside the history shelves. Nothing about the routine ever felt ordinary to him. One rainy afternoon, a young boy wandered over while Leonardo was checking out a mystery novel. The child looked up curiously. Mister, Leonardo smiled. Yes? My dad says you're the most important man in the city. Leonardo chuckled. I've heard that before. The boy pointed toward the reading room, where Margot was carefully shelving books. Then why do you still come here every Friday? The library became wonderfully quiet. Leonardo looked across the room. Margot noticed him watching and smiled the same warm smile she had given him the very first day. The smile that expected nothing. The smile that treated everyone exactly the same. He smiled back before answering. Because this is the only place in the world where nobody is afraid to tell me to be quiet. The little boy laughed. Across the room, Margot heard every word. She couldn't help laughing too. A moment later, Leonardo laughed with her. Not as a billionaire, not as the leader of a feared empire, just as a man who had finally found the one place where he never needed to be anyone else. And in the quiet heart of a small neighborhood library, surrounded by books, laughter, and ordinary people, two lonely souls discovered that the greatest love stories are rarely written by power. They are written by peace.